Okay, so I'm very pleased to have my Jewish friend David join me. We seem to be talking once every month because I've got a variety of people joining my live stream, and we're talking this month. It seems we're talking about one topic, usury. A lot of people don't realize usury, how deadly it is, how destructive it is. I should say is probably a better word for society. But not only that, it seems that it's a way that Jews control us. So I'm asking a Jew to get his perspective, my Jewish friend David. Um, and for people who've got no idea about how bad usury is, I like to just play this 30-second clip just to get people to understand roughly what's happening. Let's go for it, and then we'll get David to talk.
Of a nation's money, and I care not who makes its.
That probably didn't make sense from there. Let me start properly from the beginning.
Give me control of a nation's money, and I care not who makes its laws. Meyer Amschel Rothschild. Throughout history, moneylenders have had the special ability to create money out of nothing. The concept of usury, or unfair interest on loans, has been condemned as immoral by many key figures throughout history. For example, Julius Caesar, Aristotle, Plato, Napoleon, and even a certain man with a unique mustache were all against usury. Stephen Goodson in his book explains that people who run this debt system have used their power throughout history to subvert governments, manufacture wars that produce vast profits, and topple regimes whose banking system was not under their control. Give me control of a nation.
I think it should be clarified that they're mixing two ideas up, usury and I think they call it fiat currency with make up fake money and whatever. But I think usury is the root cause of the problem where you can start doing funny things with money. Um, so David, I've got a bunch of questions for you, so we keep some sort of structure. Is that okay? So David is quite a learned person in Jewish teachings. Where are you again? Which city, roughly?
Metro Detroit.
Metro Detroit. And we've been discussing all sorts of topics for a long time, probably years, I think. At least 2 years, maybe. Anyway, so, uh, and from a Muslim perspective, so I'm a Muslim, and I'll very briefly say from a Muslim perspective, usury or borrowing money with interest, although it's become normalized nowadays in the West, is extremely dangerous. Um, it simply put, it's against the teachings of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. But like David will talk about the details of that in a minute. Um, and it's destructive because it pays for wars, as the video roughly said. It makes wars possible because wars are too expensive without these money lenders. It makes, I would say, this is just a Muslim perspective, and maybe you disagree. It makes things really expensive at times. Basically, causes inflation is roughly what I'm going to say. People might say it's something else, but I think it's the root cause. And it's and there's so many problems, but it causes greed because you try to buy stuff you can't afford, and it's destructive to the planet because it creates a system you have to keep paying back more and more, and have to create more and more that you don't need. Therefore, it mines the planet for goods that you don't need to mine it for. So there's endless damage it causes, and it's we and there are, I'm not going to go into it because I've kind of talked about it in the previous live streams where there are solutions that were actually put down by the banks where they got rid of currencies that were essentially controlled by this usury system, and they became very rich. But the banks didn't like it and they stopped it because the banks control governments. That's a long introduction. Let's ask you, David. Is usury, this is a bunch of questions I've listed in the document I've got below. Is usury, i.e., lending money on interest, bad? If so, how?
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to give kind of a shady answer because it's not going to be a simple yes or no.
Okay.
And from a biblical perspective, or the modern economic perspective, a usury now presently is defined as excessive interest, as where historically, biblically, in the ancient times, usury was defined as any interest. But in modern days, if you look up usury, it's not, it's the definition is excessive interest. You say like, yeah, well, charging someone excessive interest is wrong. At most places, it's illegal. Even in Jewish law, it's illegal. Um, Even to non-Jews, it's excessive interest is illegal in most forms of Jewish law. This question of charging interest on a loan, I would actually flip it. I think we've talked about this a few times in the past, like, because obviously charging interest on a loan is a natural thing to do. It's more a opposite that you're coming to forbid something that is natural. In today's like modern economic terms, um, you have to charge interest because you assume risk. And if you lend someone money, whatever percent, depending on the credit worthiness of the people who are lending, you're not going to get it back all the time. In order to recuperate, um, for the risk, you need to charge interest, or just to say that it's not a reasonable livelihood, that if I'm sitting on hundreds of thousands of dollars, that I can't just make a living by lending out money and charging interest on it.
So I
Instead,
just want to clarify what you're saying, because in the beginning you said religiously it's considered bad, but you think it's natural and reasonable to actually lend
so it's
money
a
on
dispute
interest.
among rabbinic scholars. So now the majority of rabbinic scholars think that usury, interest is natural and it's needed. It's a good thing. It's required for smooth economics, and the anti-usury laws among fellow Jews, as we discussed last time, is a form of forced charity, because lending someone without charging them interest is in fact a form of charity. Like, if you have inflation and you lend something and you get it back at a later time, you're actually getting back a lesser value, and you assume risk, because very often when you lend things, you don't get it back. And like relatively, just on an informal level, if like communally, you're expected to lend to people within your community, you might only get repaid like 25% of the time. So just to it's almost absurd. From I mean, obviously the Quran and Christianity and various points make a point to forbid usury, and Judaism makes a point to forbid usury between fellow Jews. But just to mention almost the absurdity of um, forbidding interest. I mean, just to imagine what Islamic law actually requires upon you, that just some random neighbor of yours that you don't know that well, is not necessarily all that trustworthy, does not necessarily have good credit to pay you back. Like, yes, you're supposed to lend them money, and like, no, you can't charge them interest. And actually, there's in biblical law, there's even more than that, because there's all sorts of provisions where you basically have to forgive the loan. Although also in biblical law, possibly in early Islamic law, if you didn't pay back a loan, you could actually be put in slavery for it. That even in certain
Hmm.
points in history, one of the most common reasons for slavery was not paying back a loan. And they have to question.
Hmm.
You have to question, um, what does it mean to need to borrow money anyways? Like, do you think it's an obligation? Uh,
Well, I mean, just to be clear, though, the Islamic idea is not to replace lending money on interest with simply lending money without interest. The idea is actually investment. So it's so. Do you the
no, no,
difference
I
between
would completely
invest?
disagree. That's a complete modern like loophole that's copied off of Judaism. Like, with among Jews, they have what's called heter iska, which is a Jewish form of restructuring a loan into an investment agreement, where it's basically the same thing as a loan, but it's just spelt out as an investment, but the outcome
No.
is largely
Anyway,
the same. And so modern
no,
Islam,
because there's
oh,
a
you're
huge
missing the
difference.
spirit of the law. The spirit of the law is forced charity. The spirit of the law is not like, oh, like if you structure it like an investment, it's okay.
It's not
The spirit of the
structuring.
law
There's a
is
complete
that
big
you're
difference.
required to be charitable, and if you have, it's not really yours. Although there is quite a bit in certainly Judaism and Islam for wealth accumulation. In fact, generally wealth is promised as a reward for doing the right thing. Like at least in the Hebrew prophets, where straight up like wealth and a long life and prosperity is directly promised for doing the right
Can
thing.
I just clarify the difference in, because you're considering investment similar to lending money on interest. I'll say it very simply, right? When you lend money on interest, you are required to pay back everything and more. If you have an investment, there's a chance you'll lose it, so you don't necessarily get all your money back if the person can't pay it back. So therefore, you have to invest wisely, so the person has a good chance of paying the money back and making money on that investment. Do you see there's a huge difference? There's not.
Well,
It's
well,
yeah.
I think even according to Islam, like you could lend someone money and stipulate in the agreement historically that failure to pay back will result in slavery.
These are different
And
things.
you're
So
talking like, okay, interest is forbidden, but forcing the person into slavery for not being able to pay back the loan, that's okay according to Islamic law. So like what's so bad about interest? Like it's okay to force someone into slavery because they can't pay back a loan, but like charging a little bit of interest, that's somehow egregiously forbidden.
no, because the problem with, like I mentioned, the problem with lending money on interest is that you can be a bad lender, knowing full well that the person can't pay back, so you can get not just your money, but the whatever it's pinned on. So, for example, you say, "I will lose my house if I can't pay the interest." The greedy banks will be very happy to get your house at a cheap rate, essentially. You see, so it's very different to lending, or so having an investment where the person who's lending has got a potential of losing as well. So
Yeah, but I'm saying
it's a different game
lending at
completely.
interest is, if it's criminal, it's a minor form because it's something that the victim has to seek out the perpetrator. The perpetrator does not perpetrate lending at interest upon the victims. It has to be that the victim seeks out the loan and agrees to it, even at the egregious rates, knowing what they're getting
No,
into.
but maybe
You
they're
don't. But
trapped.
is there a certain scenario where people predatorily seek people out and force them to
Yeah, all
borrow
the
money at
time.
high interest
It's
rates?
normal.
Well,
Why
no.
do
So there's a
people
certain
borrow?
amount you have to
No,
get
no,
your. You're never forced into a predatory loan.
you are.
How are you forced
You
into a
are,
predatory
because
loan?
when to in England you can't buy a house outright because it's £1 million. It's impossible. So and that's actually created by the banks. This scenario is being created by the banks with fake
But you
money,
will
right?
never be in the circumstance where you're forced into a predatory loan.
You essentially
If
are if
you
you
want to
want to have a
borrow
house.
£1 million to buy a house, you might have to do, but you're never going to be in a situation you're forced
Maybe that's
to
the only
take a predatory loan.
if you've got a choice between paying extremely high rent or paying the same amount to get a house, maybe you choose to buy a house, but then you're in between two bad situations because the house is incredibly expensive, and the reason why the house is incredibly expensive is because the money that's being lent out on interest is creating a false amount of supply of money. Like you've got, oh, I've got so much more money because I can borrow it, and it creates a cycle where you create increasingly expensive houses. So anyway, the point is, you're sure the banks are predators, and the banks are such big predators that the prey has nowhere to go. That's what's happening. They have
Yeah,
to
but it's not
borrow the
it's
money.
not a force. It's like if you desire this,
If you desire to have a roof
you
over
need
your
to
house,
enter
that's not
this, but
unreasonable.
you don't actually need the thing that.
You do need a roof over your head unless you like your family to be homeless and living in a cardboard box. So I think you're not considering the reality of the situation.
What you say, if you want to own your own house.
Yes, and I told you, imagine,
But I'm saying
let's make
like you
let's
said,
make
you
it
could
even
rent
clearer. You could
very
rent, but the
rarely.
rent could be worse. The rent could be
Most
worse than paying.
most people borrow money voluntarily. I mean, there's
No, I
almost no
mean, I've
scenario.
already told you the
It's almost
scenario.
an impossibility. You can't force somebody to borrow money.
Okay,
People borrow money voluntarily, and it changes the relationship. I mean, you call it like a drug dealer, like okay, like drug dealing is bad, but like they're selling to something that people want. Like you might have drug pushers that are trying to hook people, but it's usually not the case. Like people want the drugs, and they go to the dealer, And um, loans are like that. Like people want the money, and you're saying if I'm sitting on assets, it's my right and privilege of a man of value to lend that at interest.
Okay,
You
fine.
cannot demand a loan from me. I mean, it's like robbery. Like the Quran is basically demanding robbery. Like what the hell?
No,
I have the right to lend
no.
money at
I
interest.
told you you don't have to lend money, and but you are encouraged to invest money. For example, you have to pay zakat on any money that you haven't used over the whole year. Zakat is like a essentially a
But you're saying
tax,
like, shared
right? It works.
if my neighbor wants to, fix his house and he needs money, like why
No,
shouldn't
you
I charge
don't have
interest?
to lend. You don't have to lend money in Islam. You don't. That's your understanding. It's not true.
That's the Abrahamic, the Jewish law. I mean, that's straight Moses, where you have um, multiple verses that imply that in most scenarios you should lend the money, even an obligation. There's even a straight up verse about the requirement to lend your enemy money.
Okay, cool. So let's
I mean,
just
I'm
do
not sure if Islam. You're saying Islam doesn't go to that extreme, but in
no,
Moses,
not at all.
there's a verse going all the way to the level that even if your enemy comes to you in need, um, although it does imply in need that your enemy is coming to you in need, but even if your enemy comes to you in need, you should let him borrow,
Okay. So I want to
and if
clarify the
that means
first.
and you should let him borrow without interest.
Cool. Okay, fine.
I mean,
So I'm that's
you're talking okay, like among people, you'd say like yeah, like it's kind of unbecoming to ask your friend to pay interest or something like that. But professionally, if you're going to say the money lending profession is problematic, it needs to be outlawed. Like slavery doesn't need to be outlawed. Like slavery is not problematic, doesn't need to be outlawed. But money lending at interest is the problematic and needs to be outlawed. I mean, because that's the
sure.
Quran's view.
Yeah, sure. And that might sound weird, but that's maybe I can respond to that. Slavery is not a good thing in Islam, but somehow in some scenarios where, for example, if you're fighting an enemy and that enemy will enslave your people, to stop that idea or discourage them, you will enslave their people. Not if, only in those kind of scenarios. But even if you have to enslave them, they have to eat the same food as you, wear the same clothes as you. You can't give them work that they can't easily handle. Okay, you're essentially giving them a nanny kind of job. You know where nannies work in the house, so they get to live in your fancy house. Imagine you're a millionaire, so you get to wear millionaire clothes, you get to eat millionaire food, and live in a millionaire mansion. That's called slavery in Islam. And if that slave is ever mistreated, they get to be set free. So it's different kind of slavery than most people envisage in Islam, and that's only if they come and try to kill your family and threaten to enslave your wife and have sex with her and take your children and kill them or do whatever they want to. So I think it's quite reasonable. I mean, it's actually shockingly nice what
I
Muslims.
would put it. It's like it could be like kosher, and there's disagreement among rabbis because there's two types of laws. There's the logical type laws that sort of say if the God did not, send a prophet to inform us of these laws, a reasonable man could have figured out on his own. And then there's laws that could not have been figured out uh, by man on our own. And then there could be, laws that are basically just statutes or tests that for whatever reason God wants us to do, but not necessarily because it has some rational, productive reason. So if
So
you're
I want
looking
to I want to check
but
that we've
you have these
answered.
3 categories of laws where it's something even if the Quran didn't say it was forbidden, a well thought out person would have figured out that you shouldn't do it anyways, presumably like murder or stealing. Then you have things that like are useful, but man, had the scripture not told us. And then you have things that God just commands us because God says so and may or may not be logical. So if you're looking at
So that's a
usury,
Jewish perspective, I think, because in Islam we think religion is complete as to the extent it needs to be. It doesn't talk about details. It gives you the the main picture as much as you need it, and then you can figure out the details. But I think murder is an important detail. You know, you can't, like, what is the difference between murder and killing people in a war, and all these things are important. So I don't think I believe what you believe in terms of the limitations of religious teachings. I think religious teachings in Islam are
I
complete.
mean, at least this, I wasn't saying anything at all about the limitations. In fact, it's an important factor of what type of law, because usury could be forbidden even though usury is sensical and logical. If you say like eating pig, like you say, well, maybe like, or shellfish, claim like, well, is it because it's unhealthy or bad? You say, well, God forbids it. It could be that it's not actually bad for you and it is healthy, but it doesn't change the fact that God forbid it. And there could be like, there's also forced charities, things that are a burden upon you, but you're required to do.
So
If you
I'm
say,
going to summarize
what
your
category
answer.
you're claiming that usury is, to me, like at the level where like usury is so bad that like anybody obviously just using logic should derive the same conclusion as the Quran. I was like, no, it's
Yes.
actually quite that even just to posit that usury is bad, the Quran is going out on quite a limb, because like usury to some extent seems like a pretty reasonable thing. It's like I mentioned, like slavery. Like if like
Mm,
the Quran could have just came out and said like slavery, like like it should be forbidden, but it
mm.
doesn't. But usury is something that the Quran just comes out like, no, that has to be forbidden. But on a simple level, it's like I still don't directly understand what's so bad about usury. What's so
I've
bad?
already
What's so
explained
bad
it a
about like
couple
the
of
bank
times
that just
already
charges
today.
interest on a loan? It seems like a natural thing to do. Like it does. It's not like murder or something where it's like, oh, you horrible person, you're lending money
Sure.
out at interest. But the Quran, like going out on this limb to go against usury,
Mm,
and even
cool.
there's like the Adam Green. Some people like Islam and Christianity has controlled Jewish opposition. Often the usury um, prohibition is the biggest, like obviously the Jews tricked Muslims and Christians into their religion, because like you're like, you're not allowed to lend it money, but we are, and you believe just like some nonsense that doesn't benefit you.
No, I think
Like
it does.
you're
I
saying
think
because
usually
usury,
highly
and
destructive.
Christians did eventually come to that conclusion, and like the E. Michael Jones is the old school Catholics, but that's
Mm,
um, most even Catholics today have accepted that that's why usury has became redefined as egregious usury, and most usury is seen as non-problematic. Like when you borrow a house
I
and have
don't. Mm,
a few interest loans, that's not the
yeah.
same thing as like a credit card that has like 30% fees.
Sure. Okay. I'm just going to quickly respond to that. So even the Catholic Pope, he seems to be supporting elements of, you know, gay marriage, all sorts of terrible things that nothing to do with, you know, Catholicism or Christianity. So the fact that he allows money lent on interest doesn't mean it's actually according to the original teachings. He's just bending the rules, I would say. Um, and as I said many times, as even the video highlighted in the beginning, many people who are not even religious realize the dangers and destructive power of money lent on interest. I've already talked about how it essentially robs the poor to give to the rich, because the poor borrow money and interest, the rich suck up money and interest, and there's so many problems. So in answer to the first question, when I asked you, is usury bad, you say no. And would you say, is there any way in which, just to finish off this question, because I said if so, how, is there any way in which lending money on interest is bad? Just to finish off this part of the question.
Yeah, I'm gonna say there's a unique catastrophic danger to societal collapse related to usury, and even the rabbis in the Talmud mention and warn, although generally most of the rabbis conclude that you could lend money to non-Jews at interest. It's a regulated affair, and but there were
Now, I'm going to
consistent.
stick, because I'm going to ask the next
I
question
mentioned
is
there were
usually bad
consistent
in
warnings.
Judaism.
Well, I mentioned because it's strengthening your point that there were consistent warnings from the Talmud into the Middle Ages that there was a unique catastrophic um, downfall to usury that could lead to to explain expulsions or even the Holocaust. Even in Dante, uh, usury is pretty up there. But the rabbis did recognize that there was some unique extreme danger to usury, and like most of the cycles of
What is the
expulsion.
extreme danger, though? Can you point it out? What is the extreme danger? I've lifted loads of them, but what did the rabbis realize is an extreme danger
Well, I mean,
of
the
using usury?
extreme from the Jewish point of view, from the lender's point of view, the
Hmm.
extreme danger is that people are going to get so in debt they're not going to be able to pay their debt, and therefore they're going to rise up and
Kill you,
kill and
like
expel
the
the
Jews.
Jews in order to relieve themselves of their rightful legitimate debt. So I mean,
So in that case,
from
would
the
you say
rabbinic
that?
Jewish point of view, like you're saying, like no, like these people owe us the money. Like if it worked out bad for them, but like at a certain point, so many people owe us so much money that they're going to rebel and try to kill us.
Yeah. So would you say there's inherently some, or isn't that a sign that the Jews who are the money lenders, let's say uh, in Europe at the time when they were, thrown out of Europe so many times, or attempted to be killed so many times, they must have done something wrong by lending so much money that the people who were borrowing money couldn't pay it back, and they were
Well,
trapped
and
so many
that's
times.
your Islamic or anti-usurous explanation. But like I was a librarian at one of the biggest synagogues in Brooklyn. The rabbi
Hmm.
Moshe Wolfson almost lived to 100, passed away a few years ago. And there's a certain type book they call responsa, question and answers, and they're collected from basically just questions and answers of famous rabbis. Some rabbis have like a whole shelf of like 20 books of
So okay,
questions and answers.
you're going to answer the question
I'm gonna,
now,
I'm gonna
right
make
now,
I'm gonna make the
on this
point
question.
of the
Yeah.
collection of the collection of rabbinic questions and answers in Europe over a hundreds of year period. A good portion, maybe even like 20% of them, are actually about usury.
Okay.
And there's usually like
So
and
right
it's
now you're answering the question: do Jews believe usury is bad? Because now you're
there's like
giving the
no, I mean
rabbinic.
from like I mean my I mean saying I mean obviously there's a dispute, but the majoritarian opinion is no. Forbidding usury to your fellow Jew is a form of forced charity, but in general, there's nothing wrong with
Okay,
charging
let's
usury. And
let's stick to.
although the mystics do
Okay.
recognize that there is some sort of catastrophic cycle that does happen through usury or excessive usury,
Ah. So coming back to the first
let me just put it
question.
straight up like, no, according to the rabbis, usury is not bad. It's a forced charity among fellow Jews, and among non Jews, it's not bad at all. There's nothing wrong with charging usury besides a foresight of eventual catastrophic boom bust cycles.
Okay, let's just. Okay, I'm going to ask this really clearly by putting it on the board because this is key, and people are very annoyed about this particular thing when they find out, right?
Yeah, I mean, so I got to be
So
unapologetic. Like I study, like, no,
no, can you see the
according to
question
the
on the board?
rabbis, usury to a
I mean,
non-Jew is not bad.
okay, can you see the question on the screen? Do Jews believe it is okay to lend with usury to
Saying
non-Jews?
Jews is a bad word, but I'm saying according to the rabbis, the majority, because these days I mean, I don't think Jews would look at it that way because usury, but so I'm just saying, according to the rabbinic opinion, like yes, it is completely okay to lend with interest to non-Jews.
Okay, okay. So I have to clarify something else. I put the wrong
I
kind of
mean,
question.
just this question, like
Jew-
Jews believe or not, even like we've talked about in the past, like it doesn't really matter about belief and like whether your average Jew believes or follows the law doesn't necessarily matter. That the law is relatively clear. However, egregious usury is forbidden to a non-Jew, and usually egregious usury could be seen as about 1/6 over
Okay.
16%. So like there's different opinions, but historically um, most rabbis wanted to be able to charge up to about 17% interest, and egregious usury was over 1/6.
Okay. I mean, I think any interest is egregious. But anyway, we're coming back to this is the question I should have asked and I didn't ask properly. Do Jews believe it is okay to lend with usury to other Jews?
I mean, it's a poorly worded question because it doesn't matter what Jews believe. It's forbidden
No,
by the Torah.
I
It's
care.
forbidden by the
I,
rabbis.
I, I've, I spoke to Jews that say outright you cannot lend money to
I
other
mean,
Jews.
I'm
I
saying
cannot.
it's a poorly worded question because, like, probably the majority of Jews do believe it's okay to lend with usury to fellow Jews.
Okay, maybe I should say.
It's saying it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what Jews believe. In there's real. No, I mean, it's saying the Torah
Do you mean
forbids
I
it.
should have said do
Does
does
Jewish
the
law does
Judaism
Jewish law?
Jewish law? Yeah, sorry. Okay, fine. Jewish law. Let me correct that. Jewish law allow uh
I mean, I don't have to
to
psychoanalyze like every other Jew, and can say like relatively most Jews do think it's okay to lend at interest. It's only Jewish law that forbids it.
okay, that's interesting. So does Jewish law allow to lend with usury to other Jews? Your answer is no.
Yeah, although there is what's like called the heter iska, which is similar to what the Islamic method of reframing the loan as an investment.
Yeah,
And
I
basically,
that's not Islamic.
basically, you could turn a loan into you could use this, call it a loophole, and basically you could lend at
I don't
interest.
believe in that loophole, but anyway, that's another thing. Um, so okay, and then so you answered no to to lending usury to Jews,
And that's
lending
straight
money.
in the Bible. That's not a later. That's straight in the Bible, where
Great,
where it says do not lend at interest to your brother, with the implication meaning that that means your fellow Jew, and to your
yeah.
non brother you can lend at interest. That's already in the Bible, and it's well spelt out. To the Talmud, to modern law. But like your average Jew in American Israel isn't even familiar with this prohibition. So I mean,
Okay, cool.
if you just
But
did like
let's
an interview of your average Jew on the street, they have no idea this prohibition of lending to a Jew at interest even exists.
Okay, maybe because when I spoke to a Jewish Speakers Corner, just asked one Jew, he knew that you couldn't lend money on with interest or with usury to another Jew. I've done an interview with him
Well,
on
if you
my
read the
right.
Bible or know something about
Yeah,
Jewish law, but I'm
yeah.
saying half of American Jews haven't even read the Bible, or would be to know
Okay,
that.
in that case, maybe they're not even part of the conversation. Maybe they're not even religious or
That's why I
something.
said like the do Jews believe is kind of a poor
Okay,
wording.
let's stick to the teachings itself. So, just to clarify, Jewish
This is
law
also extremely
says,
important when you mention the teachings because like Jews give this kind of like narrative, like, oh, like we were forced into money lending, we didn't want to do it. But like actually those were negotiated, and like I mentioned, I was a librarian in one of the largest synagogues,
hmm,
and the rabbis negotiated with the church officials and the local nobility the interest rates, and like
hmm.
almost 20%. I mean, if you could imagine like questions with the major leading rabbis that are still remembered hundreds of years later, like a big portion of the questions I mean, think like your average like person's not asking questions to the rabbi. Like business people, leaders, more important people are the ones that are asking questions to the rabbis, and a huge portion of them is about what the setting interest rates.
So, rabbis
And so
in
and
the
so your
past
average
were
Jew
money
may not be
lenders.
aware, like saying there's a Jewish elite of banking, and you had
Yeah.
like different levels of money lending. But your average Jew is kind of like skeptical, like it's kind of like the conspiracy theory of like, are there the elite Jews that
So,
have.
I just want to summarize so people are clear. Jewish law says you should not lend money on interest to Jews, but you can lend money on interest to non-Jews.
Yeah, I'm telling something even
You
more that
agree?
most people can't even fathom, that the leading rabbis, the same saintly leading rabbis that people remember today, for their commentaries on the Torah. Like one of the things that they were active in was the negotiation of interest rates with the church.
Great. So the rabbis are essentially money lenders as well
No,
in the
not that.
past.
I mean, some of the usually the rabbis that are respected and that wrote these large volumes of books are lifetime scholars, but often they have like a brother or a father that was a businessman, and that's why they could
They
afford.
supported the system by setting interest rates, at least.
Well,
Or
if you
they
were no, I'm
supported the
saying that
system of lending money
no,
to
I'm saying that
non-Jews.
that a, a an upright Jewish banker
Yeah.
discussed with the rabbi interest rates,
Okay.
and often it was like, like can we push for should we go for 18% or 15%? Like it was
Cool.
literally like the banker and the rabbi saying
Cool.
like,
So I'm gonna summarize.
in this case,
I,
like in this case
I'm
maybe
gonna summarize the
50%.
problem, and
But
then
I'm
you
just
should. I
making the
want.
point that the rabbis were directly involved in
Sure.
these negotiations with the church, the usury, the interest rate, and
See,
for
this
that
is.
perspective,
Yeah.
like yes, like Jewish law held that usury was okay, and they were actively involved in all aspects of it.
Cool. I'm
Although
gonna summarize the problem,
Your
and I
average
want to
Jew
see if you
remains your
realize.
average Jew remains mostly ignorant to us because like most Jews aren't money lenders.
I'm going to summarize what you said, and I want you to realize, or hopefully realize why a lot of people are angry with Jews, right? You've basically said Jewish law says don't lend money to other Jews on interest, but do lend money to non Jews on interest. And to the extent that
No, it doesn't say
Jewish
do.
rabbis are
No,
saying,
the verse in
even
Moses
telling.
says, "Don't lend interest to your brother at interest." So the rabbis
So
understand because
that
it says
means
your brother that means you're allowed to lend to non-Jews, but there's no commandment. You're not supposed to lend. You're allowed to lend to non-Jews at interest.
okay. So it looks like, I mean,
It's
it
not like
seems
a
like it,
positive commandment. There's nowhere where it says it's good to lend to non-Jews at interest. It's just allowed. And then
on
even
top of
in
that
the
you've
Talmud,
already
in the rabbinic literature, it's
yeah.
discussed the dangers of it. And generally, like even in the Talmud, it says only an upright, like lending money at interest to non-Jews is something that only leaders of the Jewish community should be engaged in.
Okay.
From a Talmudic,
Interesting.
and that's why the rabbis were actually integral, where they were to some extent part of the negotiations, and to some extent it's still that day. It's probably like that today. With um, even the Islamic countries, like the Abraham Accords, to some extent probably are normalizing usury. And even you think like Saudi Arabia, like $1 trillion, like if
Yeah.
you
So
like part of
yeah,
the reason
Saudi
it's
Arabia
so
is
cheap
messed
for
up.
you to
Yeah.
live in Jordan, like if you had $100,000 in savings, um, if you invest that in the U.S. in the usury system, basically you could increase that because you're going to be lending it out at interest. As we're
Yeah.
in Jordan, it would be very difficult to increase your money. It might just sit there and not grow, or you would have to do something like very risky, like investing in someone else's business that might have a large chance of failing.
It's
So it's
risky
very,
but more productive than simply making money create more money for the rich. You see?
I mentioned, like even I'm sure the king of Jordan has his money in the West because it's because he wants
Sure.
it to
So
grow.
Muslims can
So,
do wrong
if you're
things.
sitting on money, like you want to lend it out at interest because that's how it grows.
I don't know what the king does. I can't speak for the king. I don't want to speculate for what the
I mean,
king of
you would
Jordan does,
assume that he
right?
has a decent amount of
You can
money
make all
invested
sorts
in
of
the West. I don't
assumptions,
know.
sure.
Like I have no idea, but I mean, he may not.
Sure. But
But I mean,
let's not
if he had
speculate.
money
Let's just
invested in the West,
I'm just
Saudi
saying
Arabia is just investing $1 billion in America, right?
I would say I think it's fairly well known maybe that Saudi Arabia didn't hide it, that it you know gets money on interest, which Islamically everybody's clear amongst Muslims that it is wrong. Yeah, so we're talking about Islamic teachers. So you can have Muslims who don't follow Islamic laws. That's up to them, right? Um, can I ask you this key question, which is the title of the show? Oh, where's it gone? I don't know what's going on. Oh, maybe I keep clicking. I does it slowly. That's why. Do Jews control us with usury? EMJ, E. Michael Jones, and many other people think that it is true. That video I played in the beginning claims that it is true. What do you say as a Jew?
Yeah, ironically, because E. Michael Jones is not, he does not oppose rent seeking.
What does that
And
mean? What's rent seeking?
rent seeking is, we have the means of production, which is, I mean, a person only has their labor. The means of production is land, resources, machinery, and rent seeking is when the owner tries to monetize and gain wealth from their ownership. So, like, I could be sitting, on 100 acres of land, and rent seeking would be trying to profit from it by bringing in tenants to rent it.
Okay.
Which E. Michael Jones and Catholicism does not oppose rent seeking. So you could have large landlords that own the majority of the land, and um, so usury is only a problem connected with owning the means of production and rent seeking, because, like, in Jordan, like you said, like, there's no need probably for average people to come upon usurious loans where you're at.
There's no need, but people are now borrowing money on interest at their own peril now, and it's causing a lot of problems. But yeah.
I mean, if so rent seeking, implying that, like, in the US now, like, I mean, there's still some open land, but, like, all the good land has been taken, and private equity, hedge funds, um let's say in America, Jews own about 30% of all wealth,
Hmm.
include in like in major cities. Like, Jews might own like as much as 50% of the prime real estate in, like, New
Hmm.
York, or like Miami. But overall, like, the US is a vast territory, and there's all sorts of millionaires that have no connection or local, and Jews are mostly located in a handful of major cities. But, like, at a certain point, like, Jared Kushner just keeps on buying more and more property. So there's, I
Hmm.
don't know, hundreds of thousands of people in the U.S. that literally paid their rent to Jared Kushner's businesses.
Hmm.
Although,
Okay.
Saudi Arabia, maybe the King of Jordan too. I mean, it's possible the King of Jordan also owns hundreds of thousands of housing units
Well,
across
let's
the
not
U.S.
keep speculating what people do. Yeah, we know.
I
We
mean,
either
no,
know or we
because that's
don't
what
know.
all wealthy people do. Because, like, if you just have
Anyway,
money,
there's a different question. The question was, do Jews control us, the world with usury?
well, not because it's saying that rent seeking, according to Islam, also rent seeking is generally not prohibited,
How is rent seeking anything to do with usury?
because you only
Okay,
need
you have to answer the question,
you
not answer
because
what other people
use
are doing.
you,
Do Jews control the world with usury? It's like
no, I'm saying,
it's,
I'm saying that
no. The answer is no.
usury is only a vicious tool if you control the means of production and rent seeking together. Just like you Jews, like, have no effect on people in Jordan. Like, the fact that Jews are willing to lend money at interest, or, like, put out high interest credit cards or something, like, they're not nabbing people in Jordan, right? They're like, it doesn't matter. Like, the people in Jordan are protected from this usurious behavior.
They're not, because now we have banks that allow you to borrow money on interest, and Pete is causing a lot of people a lot of problems. Yeah,
Okay, but it's getting worse there.
it's getting worse here. Yeah,
Oh,
because
but
they're being relaxed on Islamic
so
teachings.
generally, like, E. Michael Jones and Catholics, like, opposed to, let's say, Chinese, your big problem, also, like, if you're Islamic and Christian, you're going off the Abrahamic basis of land ownership, where you don't think land ownership is the problem. And
Hmm.
then, so the problem is, okay, if the Jews control, we're called the means of production. You're looking at, like, Wall Street companies, mining factories, the infrastructure, who actually
Hmm.
owns the stuff that is necessary for the economy to go. And Jews own quite a bit of it. I mean, they don't
Hmm.
dominate. You would call, like, and globally, maybe Jews only own 5.
Once you have all the money, you can control everything else. You can buy everything you can. You can buy all the houses. You can buy all the means of production, etc. So that's and it
Yeah, I mean,
just
so
keeps.
so the problem's going to become when you're a peasant and you have no land,
Yeah.
you have no means of production, and just to survive, you have to enter into usurious loans. But I mean, like in the old days in the U.S. where you had the frontier, like okay, you could have entered a usurious loan to like, but you could have just went out there and roughed it and eventually got your land and settled it. But now there's no real land left to settle, and so you're basically into this forced slavery system just to pay for rent. So,
Hmm.
I'm mentioning a problem like for if you're Islamic or Catholic, you don't see this rent seeking behavior as problematic. So it's like, well, how come this or this person owns so much land?
Yeah, we have
And,
we
and, in,
in
and in the same
Islam
way,
we're
it's like,
allowed
well,
to.
you can't lend money. You should have to lend me money and not get and not uh I should be able to like go to the corner bank and just like, I want to do something with my life. Give me some money and I'll pay you back. Why can't you do the same thing with land?
Yeah, because it's completely different, which I've talked about. Anyway, yeah, I've talked about
Uh,
like there's one where you're accumulating more and more wealth, and forcing people to pay you more. And land is not a static thing. So, for example, if you got um, farmland, farmland doesn't automatically produce more wealth, right? You have to take care of it. You have to invest in it. You have to put crops in it. You have to, it's an investment that can go both ways. It can go well or not. As I said before, usually only goes well for the lender. So that's the essential thing. And that's what the Quran says. Usury is not trade. Usury is not part of um, a good part of capitalism.
you put it
Um,
there's like because usury, if you say
okay,
like,
but you haven't answered the question. Do Jews control us with usury in any way? Is there any truth
I
in that?
mean, no, I would say
That's the
like
main topic today.
usury is probably like in the bottom five of the tools the Jews use. I mean,
To
because you're
control
talking like
people. So
control.
it's
You don't
one thing that they use to control people, but it's not
well,
the number one.
I mean, because no, I'm saying usury is you don't control people through usury because like people have to ask you for a loan, and
Yeah,
so you
but
can't.
unless they have to, when they have no choice, that's another thing. And you
Well, I'm
talked
saying the
about the
main method
scenario.
that Jews or someone that would use to control people would be by implementing law, and like usury might be part of it, but it's saying they control you by passing a law, and now everyone has to follow this. Yeah, as
What's the
opposed
law,
to
for example?
well, I mean anything. So I'm saying the main mechanism, saying Jews control is through the control of Congress or politicians and the enactment and passing of laws.
Yeah, but
And so
okay.
your average person that borrows money at a usurious, so you have another problem where power and wealth has already been gained, and if you know take low birth, if you're born without power, then usury slows down your rise because basically what usury will happen, like in order for you to rise up, you have to make someone else money in the
Yes.
capitalistic system, even
To
without
make the
usury.
rich richer, you mean?
Well, even in Jordan, it's probably that way also. Like if you're just a kid who wants to go out into the business world, for your first few years, like you have to make somebody else like, one, two,
Okay,
five, ten
cool.
dollars
You're
for
answering the
every
next
dollar you make.
question.
You're gonna work in someone's store, whatever you're gonna do, you have to make someone else money in order just to make yourself money so that you could try to do what you want. And then usury could make it even worse. Like, okay, I'll let you in the game. Like, eventually you could be a part, but like, you got to make me $1 million first, like, just for
Mm,
me to let you in. And so
yeah.
the usury system, but there's a lot of other factors. Even if you outlawed usuries, like even in Islamic countries, there's a lot of other factors that are part of Abrahamism, Abrahamic
Okay,
law that favor the landholder, favor power, and
sure.
so usury is just one of those.
So you're talking
It,
about
it,
business.
it is saying
Is
ownership of land. It was saying that obviously
is
the biggest like if Jews control people like in New York City or something like that, you're
mm,
talking where you actually have a Jewish landlord. So I mean, you're talking about like where you literally have a Jewish landlord. And so
mm,
if you're in an urban area like New York City, Miami, Baltimore, or something like probably like 1/3 of the people who live in those cities like literally have a Jewish landlord. And so
Hmm.
that's a much higher level of control where, even in London, probably like out in London, probably
And
one
how are
out of
they
five, one
accumulating
out of
all
five
this?
people in London might have a Jewish landlord. And,
Yeah,
so that's a higher level of control to be
sure.
someone's
And how
landlord
do they
than to,
become landlords? Like, how do they be like? They're relatively few Jews, and they're very high percentage of ownership. Let's say, as you're saying, becoming landlords. How does that scenario happen? I would say it's because of usury in the beginning, making rich Jews become even richer so they can buy more things, and they basically essentially have a monopoly. So they aim to own everything is the plan, and then they will have complete
yeah,
control.
but you already have to be the majority owner to profit from usury. Like a poor person can't profit from usury. You have to be
That's
rich
right.
to.
So if you're
And so,
rich, you get
but
richer, the
the
poor get
Jewish game
poorer.
plan, Jews didn't gain their original wealth from usury. Jews uh, have different methods, and it's saying the main method of control is where you actually write the laws, or you become the advisor to the king, or
I
that's
mean,
much
that's
more
yeah,
power
that's
than.
another level.
And
When you
it
say
goes
all the
together
tax,
with usury because that once you write the laws, then you could write the laws that advantage you in financial transactions. But just charging
yeah,
interest on loans and saying like, no, being a landlord is much more profitable than lending at interest.
I think they
And
all come together. So
but
you
they
make
do go
once you're
together.
rich,
Well, I'm saying
once
that
you're
what do you do with
yeah,
your money? If
yeah,
you have wealth, you invest it in
that's
land.
right. So
The
that's what you do.
Talmud
If
already
you
said
have
that
money, what
2,000
you
years
do,
ago. The best way to make money, the best way is to be a landlord. And if you have money, you should buy property and rent seek with it. And the Talmud
sure,
has like multiple books about rent seeking, basically explaining how to do that, like how to take
yeah,
money,
and
buy land, and rent seek.
yeah, sure.
Even
They're all
like even
together. Once
Islam,
you have
Islam is
money, then you
relatively
buy
friendly to
power.
rent seeking. I'm saying Islam is relatively friendly to rent seeking. Like
Yeah, but they're very
if
different
you
things
were just
instead.
like,
Yeah,
I'm a powerful man of the community. I'm going to buy this land and develop these houses, and now
sure.
I'm rich.
We've only
You
got
would
seven
probably be a
minutes. Let's see.
respected person
Okay.
in Islamic society.
Let's just try to get this question done. So, um, how can businesses get money without usury? Do you think it's are there good alternatives to usury to develop your
No,
business?
that's why I said because usury is a forced charity. So business is not the place for charity. And if you're,
No, the
talking
lack of usury is a forced charity, isn't that right?
outlawing usury is forced charity.
Yes, yes, yes. Okay,
I'm
cool.
saying
Yeah.
you in business you have to lend. I mean, just like pure economics, laws, supply and demand, you assume risk when you lend money. You have to, like it's not. You can't
I'm
have a
saying, is
business.
there an
You can't have
alternative
a.
to?
It's not business to lend to.
Do you know the difference between lending and investing? Do you know the
I was saying
difference?
no one. If you can't lend at interest, no one's going to do it. No one's going to go
No,
there.
no, because you can do
It's
this
not
thing
a
called
business.
investment. There is an alternative it's called investing.
Yeah, but I'm saying like no one is going
Have
to.
you seen Shark Tank? Have you seen
Yeah, yeah, you're
Dragon's
making
Den?
some
They
people will
invest, they don't
invest,
lend.
but if you can't charge interest, who's going to lend money? You can't have
Because
a
they
bank.
won't lend money. They will be like Shark Tank, big investors. They'll invest money. It's a very different thing. Why are you
Yeah, but saying
ignoring the
most people
idea of
don't need
investing?
investments. Most people need loans. Most people
No,
aren't
that's what
like
you're saying.
most people that need
No,
like a few $1,000s for like a medical bill or to fix up their
no, that's what
house.
you're claiming.
They don't need. They're
Anyway,
not like trying to open up a small business.
yeah.
I mean, you're talking about small business loans. Yeah, but what about just your average loan, like your average person for a credit card that puts their groceries on their credit card? They borrow $100 from the credit card to buy their groceries.
I think you're trying to avoid the
What's
scenario
going
of
to
people
replace what's
investing,
going to
and
replace
you're
that? Like
saying,
no,
you know,
what I'm saying it's not a business, then it's a charity. So like
I'm not talking about charity.
Jewish communities have what's called our gemachs, which stand for Gemilas Chassidim, or just doing loving charity. And one of the things are Hebrew free loan societies, loans, and often they'll require you to get two signatures or someone that will put to pay
So
the money
Jews are
back.
quite nice to other Jews because they lend money to each other without interest. Is that
But
what
to
you're
make it,
saying? These
those are
societies.
charities. Like
Yeah. So they
there's no such
these are
thing as
charities just for
a
Jews,
bank
right?
that does interest free loans. you have the small business banks, but like if you can't charge interest, like banks just wouldn't do loans.
Yeah. So, but these charities
In
are run
Islamic
by wealthy
society or
Jews.
Orthodox Jewish society, where you have people who believe and are charitable, you might be able to survive without loans. Where people just go to the charities and and get help. But
Sure.
in
Since we
the
got 4 minutes, can you answer this question? And I'm going to reword it just to make it a bit more, maybe better or interesting. You've already said that Jews control a lot of wealth, property, etc. They even control politicians, like you said earlier on. It's very good to buy power, so you can get even more money, right? Which the Jews
when
do.
real Jews own the most prime real estate in the world,
Yeah, yeah,
like
sure,
New York,
sure,
London, Paris,
great.
Baltimore,
So
Miami.
they
Like
have
Jews own
they
some of the
control
most prime real
property, they
estate in
can
the world.
yeah, they control property, they have wealth,
I'd
they
say that's
control
probably the most
politicians.
valuable asset. Like, I mean, if you
Cool,
look like, relatively, like and that's the
sure.
point I'm
So
pushing
the
back against
question
usury,
is,
because rent seeking is actually more powerful than usury.
if you okay, so here's the question: if you wanted non-Jews to become free from Jewish power, that is the power of being all their landlords and controlling politicians, etc., which you think is okay. Um, how do you recommend they escape from Jewish power?
Well, I mean, you can't.
You can't. They should give
You
up.
could rebel. You could rebel or join the resistance. But and the Jews are one of the elites that are. Um, I mean, if you want to like running society, writing the laws that we live by, that over generations have accumulated the most of resources, and will use those resources to rent seek and lend out to gain more
And
resources.
control
Well,
politicians
I'm saying
and
you'd say
okay.
like it's kind of like okay, like you took low birth for like rich dad poor dad. If you had it is what it is. That's a certain you could understand Jews, their role. You could judge Jews. You could love
There's no
Jews.
way to beat the Jews.
Well, I mean, you could try if you're saying like, um, I would advise against trying to out Jew the Jew. You could often like ignore the you could often ignore like in Jordan, you could often just move on with your life and have a good life, raise a family. If you're going to struggle in like town square or in power, then you're probably going to come up directly against the Jews, and you could emerge victorious in various battles, local town squares, speaker corners against Jews. Um, but like in terms of wealth, um, it's going to be very difficult to acquire more resources and wealth. Although, like I mean, the Asians coming to the U.S., some of the Indians that like per capita are richer than the Jews, and even Muslims. Like a lot of Muslims are hard workers and high performers, and I hear all sorts of people like even in Dearborn think like these people don't have credit cards. They just don't don't
Hmm,
borrow money,
that's right.
and then when you need to
So
borrow,
that's the
let's say
solution
when
to
you need to
outdo
buy
the
that
Jew.
house, when you need to buy
Don't
that house, then you have
participate
that
in their
tribal
system.
community, but it was like Jews, but Muslims that when you get married or hit that age where your family's going to get together and let you borrow $200,000 without interest, you could borrow that house.
There you go. That's how you outdo the Jew. Like Jews, what they do, they support each other, don't they? Like they invest in each other's
I mean,
businesses. They
I mean that's not
and they
outdoing the
don't
Jew.
lend each other.
That's just operating according to your system. And I mean, outdoing the Jew would be like trying to open up like a that's like what Saudi Arabia is like trying to open up a bigger, better bank.
Yeah,
They're
exactly.
they're
Exactly, a
yes,
non-interest bank that invests in people rather than lends them interest, and actually
well, I mean,
see
no, I mean
the
that's not Saudi Arabia
no,
is like trying to
no,
run like
Saudi Arabia is terrible, but like
I mean they're
if it
running Bank of
did,
America. Basically, they run and own Bank of America, but
mm,
your average American doesn't know that like Bank of America is mostly Saudi owned.
wow, okay, I didn't
But I
know
mean,
that.
but they're
Okay,
basically, I mean, they're trying to out Jew the Jew because the Saudi capital in Bank America is just as egregious and usurious as any of the Jewish banks. So I
okay.
mean, that in
Let
that
me
sense,
summarize here, just to finish off, possibly right. To out Jew the Jew, as you put it, right? Um, you got to compete against um their
we're trying to like
system, and
control politicians. Like I'm going to control politicians, just like you bribe
mm, I
politicians,
think
we
that
will bribe politicians. You
like
got your
Jewish
Jeffrey
teach
Epstein, we got our Jeffrey Epstein.
No,
So
no,
like,
I
I
don't
would
think we're going to
recommend against
outdo the
that.
Jew like that, though. I don't think we're going to play dirty, which I think the Jews do, right? I don't say all Jews, but these Jews that think it's okay to control politicians and make them pay more money to other Jews with the little investment they give. Like
Well, I mean, a lot of
they
people
have
are being like,
APAC
no, I mean,
and they make
Dearborn's got like almost more strip clubs than anywhere in Michigan.
wow.
Well, I'm saying
Why?
like,
What's special about Dearborn that they have so many strip clubs?
I mean, just because it's legal. So I mean, presume you have immigrants that come over and they're allowed to do it, and so they just end up in that business. I mean, it's
Yeah.
probably the grass is greener on the other side. So Muslims that were forbidden or something from this thing, and then they come to America, and it's like it's easier to open up a strip club than a mosque. I mean, it takes like less paperwork and regulation to open up a strip club than a mosque. So you just have a lot of people that move into that business. But I'm
Are
just
you
saying
saying
that.
Muslims are running strip clubs in Dearborn?
Well, I'm saying it's just a fact. There's like a ton of strip clubs in
Oh,
Dearborn, and a lot of
yeah.
them are Muslim owned. It's just like alcohol
Wow.
stores, like Muslims dominate the
That's so
alcohol
messed up.
business. But I'm
But
saying
if you really
it
wanted to
doesn't
out
matter that
Jewish,
it's against Islam. You think I'm going
yeah.
to go to like the strip club in Dearborn. It doesn't matter that like, oh, don't you know that this is against Islam? There's
Hmm.
certain other factors. So I'm saying like it's like usury or something like that also like a lot of people fall into because you're rent seeking usury. You want to become rich, and like a lot of Asians, you say, well, you just model the Jewish behavior, like the Jewish secrets to becoming wealthy. And then
Hmm.
if you're going to put like, okay, usury, I mean, some of it is bad behavior, there's some good behavior, but the bad behavior, the
Hmm.
usury. But no, I mean, you're going to have that problem like in the West. Like you're going to face the temptation of getting ahead according to the Western ways, and especially when it's completely voluntary, like where you live, or there's law, or you'll be shamed. As opposed to like once you're in America, like no one necessarily cares whether you follow voluntary Islamic law or not.
Okay, cool. I'm just going to wind up here and by making my comment on how to overcome this system of control by Jews. And that is you outdo these these Jews. Not all Jews are like this because some Jews are secular, they don't even follow Judaism, etc. But the Jews who try to control people through banking, etc., through this usury system, um, what they are doing essentially is they're capturing wealth of the poor, and that is harmful long term because it's not how it's actually really harmful. Even like the Saudis, who they capture all the oil wealth, they don't know how to spend it, and they're misspending it, and they're destroying Saudi Arabia. But if they invested it properly, what investment does, allows rich people to let go of their money because they have too much money, they can't manage it properly. They give it to poorer people who are eager to use that money well, and they will use it better at a micro level. And in short, what I'm saying is the Jews have a grab it all system, which is long term is going to be destructive, and it's a greedy system because they encourage people to have wars so they can have more money, and it's destructive to the whole world. Whereas the Muslim system is to invest, and invest actually creates more real wealth. Like you invest in a farm, if you lend money on an interest to a farm, you're not actually encouraging necessarily the farm to grow more money. If it fails, you just steal the land from them, essentially. Um, but investment is a productive attitude to make the world a better place. You won't make people hate you. Um, you'll make people happier because you're supporting people. So it's a very different system. The investment system will win in the long term. The lending money and interest will be destructive in the long term. So that's why you should go in the Muslim attitude of investment rather than lending money on interest. If hopefully that makes sense. And you can certainly, like David is saying, there are people who are Muslims who have money who are helping each other to bypass this usury system, so they don't have to get involved, and they become stronger and stronger, more powerful, and they can therefore, as David sort of says it, maybe outdo the Jew, maybe, but not outdo the Jew doesn't mean be get involved in the usury system. It means overcome the power control that Jews have because of the usury system. Does that make any sense at all to you? All of that what I just said?
Yeah, I mean, I'd systemize it a little bit more and separate it into two factors. Like there's the personal advice for how a person navigates the world where usury is already commonplace.
Hmm.
Without any like larger battle, like why is it this way, who are these people that are
Hmm.
doing this, how did it come to be this way, but just simple practical advice like don't get that credit card, or try to pull your resources, avoid usury. And then there's the the change the world, make it a better place, or try to wield and leverage power to push the direction of history in a different way, where you might find yourself coming straight head up with the battle with the Jews or something,
Hmm.
but which could be a misnomer because it's really the battle to change society to be better. And so then you're already entering one of the mysteries to why is this the current state of the world, and the mystery of the Jews, what role do the Jews play, good and bad in that. And certainly understanding Jews is valuable, especially for
Hmm.
financial things. And like say if you're going to be involved in finances, international business, or and like often like most Muslims or people do business with Jews, and you could
Hmm.
have your suspicions of Jews and your thoughts or whatever and still do business with them. Just understand perspective. That's why I tried to kind of straight up give the not my own personal take but the rabbinic take, where usury is meant to be defended. And there's also the Jewish larger role in the unfolding of history, where you just have Jews trying to follow Jewish law, where you have Muslims trying to follow Muslim law, be the best person, best family member, community member. But then you have the prophecies of what's going to happen at the end of days, and usury is one of the big factors in
Hmm.
but like wealth, control of the creation of a one world order that the prophecies talk about. And then you could see that falling into place where you have laws that your rules now being directed by computers, and it could appear to be rigged against you. And so
Hmm.
even you could whatever a person believes about the end of
Cool.
days, how it's going to unfold. But just usury is going to be one of like the big things at the end of days. It is one of the big things that causes this boom and bust cycle. But there are other factors too that you got to consider,
Oh, is
like
that Jewish teaching or a Jewish prophecy that usual will be uh, this big destructive system
I mean, I
in the
have a
end of
whole thing on
days?
my channel where I go. I mean, actually, in the Talmud, there's a dissenting rabbi that says you shouldn't
I'm
lend
just
to.
asking, is that true? Is that true? So at
Yeah,
the
I'm
end
saying
of
there were
days,
always major dissenting views that were opposed to usury to non-Jews and forewarn of destruction, where it was specifically that the destruction of the Jewish community was tied to usury. So that like even
I can imagine that.
among Jewish sages and scholars, there was, and this going back over 1,000 years, and it's repeatedly
Yeah.
over hundreds of years, where Jewish sages and scholars specifically warn of the connection of usury
So
and the
wise
distinction
people
of.
amongst the Jews have told Jews not to indulge in it because it will be destructive for the Jews and dangerous for the Jews, as it has been over the centuries.
Well,
So
no,
I think
those
they're
were
quite wise
usually
to
dissenting rabbis.
realize.
Well, I mean,
Yeah,
so
and
so
so,
unfortunately for the anti-usury, but the dissenting rabbis are recorded. But
mm,
I mean, the most famous rabbis, like I said, like they were directly involved in the usury, and one of the things that the rabbis did was negotiate the interest rates with the church
yeah, sure.
and the nobility.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you very much. That in many ways that was eye opening. I don't think uh, any either of us to say, "Ah, we won" or "You won" the debate. I think what happened was
It's a very
you
complicated
shared,
issue.
yeah, you
I mean,
shared a lot of
it's
useful
not like most
information
sins or
about,
something. It's very complicated to understand what usury
yeah. Okay.
is, or like how could this thing be so bad?
Sure, sure. So I have to wind up now, but I think we all learnt many things. We can take from it what you want. But I appreciate you shared a lot of things about Jewish control through usury, etc. Whether you think it's bad or not, that's another thing. And I appreciate your time. Thank you very much, David. I learned a lot from you. Appreciate it. Thank
Okay,
you.
yeah, looking forward
Yeah.
to next month.
Cool. Thank you. Bye. Shalom. Salam. Peace.